Hi, everyone. Welcome to another book discussion between Ann Arbor District Library and the Unerased Book Club. Tonight, the book we are discussing is called Sharks in the Time of Saviors, and this is by Kawai Strong Washburn. And before we get started with our discussion, we can just do a quick introduction. I'm Lucy. I work at the library in the youth department. I also do programming for teens and adults. I am a white female, 50 years old. I have brown hair and glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a wall of watercolors.
I'm Emily. I am a librarian at the Ann Arbor District Library. I select books for kids, but I do programming mostly for adults. I am a white woman in my mid-30s with brownish red long hair, and I am sitting in front of a mostly white wall with a Matisse print behind me.
I'm Elizabeth. I work in the archives at the Ann Arbor District Library. I am in my early 30s. I'm a white woman sitting in a chair behind a white wall with some greenhouses behind me, and I'm wearing glasses and I have dark hair pulled back into a ponytail.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I work in the youth department at the Ann Arbor District Library. I'm a library technician and I do programming for all ages, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
Hi, my name is Audrey. I am a librarian at the Ann Arbor District Library. I select mainly for our tools and art print collections. I am a white woman with dark hair and glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a light blue wall with a colorful picture of an elephant and a landscape picture on it, painting.
I'm Sheela. I am founder and co-facilitator of Unerased Project of Raising Voices, and I'm a Asian woman in my early 30s and wearing glasses. My hair is shoulder length and about it's like my background is a photo of Adam's Peak, which is a location in Sri Lanka, and I'm really excited to talk about this book today. This is the first Pacific Islander written novel that we have read as a book club, and the book club has been around since 2018. So this goes to show that both it takes a lot of effort to find Pacific Islander writing, and that there's a lot of room for these stories. So Sharks in the Time of Saviors is a novel. It is a family saga, and it is about a family of 5 Native Hawaiians who experienced a could have been traumatic event, and what does that mean for their family moving forward, and it tracks the family over a period of about 10 to 15 years. So I just want to open it up and ask how does the whole book, if you like it, if you dislike it, let me know.
And I will say, Sheila, your sound for me was a little bit going in and out. It's just so if we ask you to repeat yourself, that's why we're not being
good. Okay.
Oh, just so you know.
I can start. I really enjoyed this book. I listened to it on audio, and it had different narrators for each of the characters, which I really enjoyed. I thought the narration was really captivating, and I was super into the story. It is some of the subject matter is difficult, but the way it was written was just like natural and flowing, and I just really enjoyed the experience.
I feel like I had a kind of weird experience with this book because it was definitely incredibly well written, and I could see how it was like very well executed, but it didn't like emotionally connect with me for whatever reason. So I had this like weird experience where I was like, this is fine, like the whole book basically. And that just doesn't happen to me that often, so I am puzzled like about it because it was incredibly well written, and like I can appreciate the artistry that went into it. It just wasn't for me, this one. So
I listened to the book, and I agree that it was neat to have the cast, and I think it helped, especially in the earlier chapters when there was a little bit more use of pidgin, to just kind of in the way that they performed it. I didn't have to look things up to know what was being said. But I listened to it a little while ago. So over the last couple days, I reread like the first third of the book, reading it, and then read the end. And I'm so glad I did, because I also initially struggled with connecting to the book, despite the fact that it was really beautifully narrated. And I think I just needed to read it at a little bit of a slower pace than the narration did, because there was a lot of things that you had to really sit and think about how you felt about them, because it was a very heavy read, despite there being a lot of humor in it as well. I guess that's a long way of saying I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about it too. At first I was reading it really slowly. I was there with the characters and the narration, but it's with the book it wasn't like super intense, but it was just meant to be read at a slower pace. And after a while, I got a little frustrated being kind of stuck in molasses with the characters. And maybe part of it is the success of the writing, or making you feel so deeply and emotionally like there's a lot going on each page. But I still had, after a while, I just got kind of annoyed with some of the characters and didn't really want to hear them speak anymore. But I also liked the language of it, and I liked the fantastical pieces in it. I like the part talking about the gods. But sometimes there were a couple of times, actually at least 3 times, where I thought I was reading the same chapter 2 in a row, and I got halfway through. I'm like, wait, why is she doing that? Oh, it's not her, it's Dean. Like, I did that a few times, and I think as an experienced reader, I was kind of surprised that I did that to myself. So for some of the chapters being so short, I kind of bounced around a lot. But I like the book. It's not my favorite read that I've done for this discussion group. I loved reading it really slow at the beginning and taking time with the characters. I just got kind of a little bored, and I was trying to read things quicker to get through things, but then I was missing things. And so I don't know, I'm excited to hear it kind of broken apart with everybody tonight, and just talk a little bit about the ending I'm looking forward to. So yeah, Lucy, what did you think?
I really liked this book. I think a lot of it was like as we all said, it was beautifully written, and for some reason, sometimes you read something and that just pulls you in. I loved the way that it switched between the characters, and I really particularly liked the parents, Malia, and finally Augie, whose voice we get at the end, which I thought was like really moving and just really nicely bookended the whole story. I also, like, I thought it was incredibly sad. Like, it made me feel sad reading it, but it also was filled with humor at parts, which I think is a really hard thing to convey as an author. And I think this author did that really well. And then I liked the way that the gods sort of played into it, and the mythology. So like, I can see why if you weren't able to, if it wasn't pulling you in, it would be not as exciting, but I really loved it.
Yeah, this is one of the books that it was difficult for both me and Fatema. I started listening to it, I want to say last summer. Yeah, it was definitely last summer. And I just couldn't get into audiobooks. I tried again. We picked the book, neither of us had read it. And I tried again this summer, and it captured me a lot more. And I agree a lot with Emily and Audrey. I mean, I feel like everyone has very similar sentiments. Of the writing was really beautiful, but the story was very slow. And that's a very difficult tension point to work with, as Amanda said, being experienced readers, wanting to move faster and ingest what's happening at a quicker. And I'm excited to hear how people think about that in this conversation. So I'm trying to find words to we sit with that discomfort and like appreciate that moving forward in books that may be difficult in future conversations.
I mean, as much as I found, a lot of what I found difficult about it wasn't so much the writing, but just about how weighted it was, because it just seemed like no one was getting any breaks, which happens a lot to a lot of people. But it made it hard because you're rooting for these characters, and you're just feeling a sense of hopelessness, which was challenging. But something I really enjoyed in it was the sibling dynamics. I am also one of 3 siblings, and so you can't help but look at those and relate things through your own views. But seeing how their dynamics changed from 1995 to 2000 up through 2008, 2009, as they're growing from being kids to teenagers to being kind of forced to be adults earlier than some of us were. And that was neat to kind of track through the years, and was much easier to track when I was flipping through the physical book than it was with the audiobook, because I'm always needing to look back and seeing like, oh, but how much of a time jump was this, and where's the location change and things like that.
To pick up on the sibling piece a little bit, I think that something that struck me as interesting with the siblings too was the way you see how for children who are in the same family, the way that their parents view them and the pressures that their parents put on them and the expectations that their parents have, how it like informs so much of their existence. And like even for Nainoa, you would think, oh, they're worshiping him all the time and he's the savior, and in a way he ends up, I mean, he ends up having one of the hardest experiences. And it takes them so long to see that their other children have their own gifts. But I just think that it was frustrating. It was really frustrating. But I just, yeah, I like seeing the family dynamics and the way that the structure of the family influenced how everyone behaved.
Yeah, it was also interesting to me, although somewhat frustrating, to see the ways that the pressures the parents put on the kids or didn't put on the kids like affected them, I think. There was also, to me, there was something about the like magical realism that was like at the edges of the story that I kept like, I think because of the blurb on the back, I like kept waiting for there to be like more of that, or like a bigger instance of that, and then there just never was, which I guess you could say is like kind of how real life can be sometimes. So like that could be like totally also like a totally realistic experience that people have, but I was like interested in that, and I guess I kind of, one thing I wish there had been more of was like that magical realism and like the exploration of the like belief that both the parents had of the gods, because I just don't know that much about like Native Hawaiian like spiritual beliefs, and like so I was curious. I was like, this sounds cool, and it would, I don't know, it would have been cool to hear more about that.
No, I had a similar thought too. I enjoyed the magical realism parts and learning some of the or hearing or experiencing some of the mythology that some of the characters were experiencing. I did like how it was sort of on the fringes, where it didn't overpower the story. And I feel like with so many character voices and so much like heavy-heartedness and depth going on with the story and what the characters were feeling and their emotions, and I thought about this, I don't know if I would have wanted more magical realism to kind of like soften, or if that would have taken even more like effort and thought as a reader to spend time with the characters, analyze what they were thinking, and put it through the lens of these sort of fantastical elements that could have been going on around them. So I was kind of like on the fence about, I mean, it is what it is. That's how the author wrote it. But as somebody who was like struggling with like, come on, let's see what's going on in the book. Everyone's struggling. Everybody's like, I was afraid the book was honestly going to end and there would be sort of like, everyone be in a terrible place and things would just end, and you close the book and you're like, okay. So yeah, those were my thoughts on the magical realism part. There was just enough to keep you going, but I can't decide if I wanted more or less for complicated reasons.
Kind of to your point, Amanda, it wasn't until like maybe the last 5% of the book that things sort of started turning around, and you caught that glimmer of hope, or that little slight wave of hope. And Audrey I had the exact same feeling about the magical realism. Like, either do it or don't, because I was waiting for it, and I felt like weirdly gaslit by the back of the book. Like, am I not reading this? Do I not know what magical realism is anymore? Like, have I not read enough South American authors? Like, on that, like, is my rusty reading like all for naught? And I was wanting like that specific brand of magical realism contrast the other forms of magical realism that we experience in literature. And if we have that, I think it would have justified the slower pace a little bit more, because you get to imagine something a little bit different in their reality as opposed to just the drudgery. It's the day in and out.
I went in completely blind. I did not read the back of the book. And so I think that like, it was the appropriate for my taste amount of magical realism, because it kind of snuck in, like right at the beginning when they were talking about when they saw the ghosts for the first time. And at first I thought it was a hate group. And then I like read a little deeper and was like, oh, no. Okay, here we are. This is our kind of story. And so I appreciated getting just those little tastes, especially looking at it through the eldest and youngest siblings' perspectives, because there is the like, does Nainoa really have powers? Sure, there was the sharks and the finger, but now all these people are coming into our house. I appreciated not knowing really too whether it was magical or not, and kind of going through that. And I think it made the very end all the more powerful when you did get that larger piece.
Yeah, I agree with you, Emily. Like I like magical realism, but I also was like, this is fine. I also do not ever like read the back of the book when I go in and start a book. So I think that definitely has an impact on my experience. But yeah, I thought it was a good amount, and I thought that it kind of tied together beautifully in the end with the Night Marchers and Augie. And like, yeah, the story isn't very full of hope, but that's kind of how life is sometimes. And I really appreciated that. Like, it's a real, with the magical realism, but it's a realistic story of family. And it really shows, like, I wanted Dean's character to like not be caught up in the things he was, but like, that's what happened. And I think that we just kind of had to accept that happens, and that is a thing that was intentionally done by the author.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't necessarily think about it as magical realism. To me, it seemed more like this, like it was the mythology of their culture. And so it was just kind of their connection to that. And so I just sort of took it as like, that's what they believe in, those are their set of beliefs. And so, and then I think in the end, like trying to think about what the question of God was and how much it changed, and God could be a person, God could be, this idea of trying to be a savior, God could be these actual gods. But like, I feel like in the end, it came to just this real connection to the land, the actual like physical land, like Augie has a space in the leaves. And so I guess I just thought it was, I don't know, I kind of thought it was beautiful, like this whole, yeah, I guess I didn't really think about, I know it was talked about as magical realism, but it didn't really strike me as being magical realism. It struck me more as being like a set of beliefs, I guess.
Yeah, I guess just because that was the part of the book that I connected with the most, I was like, give me more of this. Because yeah, it's not that I didn't like the characters. I have never read a book that I felt so indifferent about so quickly, which was a really bizarre experience. Like, it pulled me along. I just feel like, yeah, it was a very weird reading experience for me. There was enough to keep me going. There was enough to keep me invested. Like, I read it. It wasn't a struggle to read it, but it also feels like I got done and I was like, I don't know. Like, I just don't feel like I ate a whole meal almost.
It took the author quite a bit of time. I think I remember reading for the 5 or 7 years to write. I'm curious. I mean, maybe that added to feeling fragmented or feeling kind of like we keep repeating, so it's slow or maybe not as engaging as if you have a for a while. You change as a person, you change as a writer. Maybe the intent has changed as well. And I'm curious because you all curate for a living. Do you see a lot of opportunities from Pacific Islander culture makers, whether it's books or art or plays or whatever?
I mean, as far as books, like I don't see a lot of I don't see a lot of Pacific Islander literature and stories, although like he names some names in the back of his book, and I definitely and then like in one of the podcast interviews that was in the extra material that he talked about some authors. So then I went and looked them up and I was like, oh, these are in our collection. There's more there than I mean, it's not a lot, but I guess maybe it's never been brought to my attention. But I'm not aware of like other I'm not seeing it in other places personally.
I'm curious, because I know it did take him a very long time to write it. I know he was also writing it while also working full time and being a parent. I did not do any like deep digging to find out if he is still working a job that is not a writer, or if he is turning more fully to writing, because as I think most of us mentioned, the writing was beautiful. I am definitely interested if he does come out with another book. I will pick it up. I may not finish it depending on whether I'm drawn into it or not, but I do want more. And I'm curious what other stories he may tell in the future. I don't know how you all would feel. Would you track down more of his work?
I would, but
Yeah, I would. I liked it, so I would definitely read more.
Yeah.
I would be curious since I did love the writing so much. And it's rare to find like a style of writing that you just instantly want to listen to. I really, when I first started reading the physical book, I really wanted to listen to it, and I just couldn't get my hands on a copy of the audio. So I was reading it, and as I was reading it, I was like, this would be really beautiful to be here read aloud. So, and since I wasn't super into this, but liked enough of it, I would pick up something else by him to see what else he would do. Like, would he tell stories from Hawaii? Would they be based in family? Would they, what is his, and again, I don't know anything else about him and what he's done, but I will say that one thing that made me like this book was the dedication at the beginning that says, for Granny, who drove me 80 miles round trip to get the next book in the series. So he's been a lifelong reader, and he's been probably instilling that with his own kids and his own family since he's writing so beautifully. Like, it's been around him, like books and writing have been around him for that long. So that just told me a little bit about like him.
To answer your question, Emily, I think that if I came across his book, I would like give it a shot, but I don't know that I would like go, I'm not gonna like look it up or like go hunt it down, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's too many books to like,
I think we've talked about this in other book clubs, but I want to know someone who's read it, because then I can ask and say, do I pick this up or not? Which is one of the great things about working in a library, is odds are pretty good you can find someone who's read something you want to learn more about.
Nice plug. Nice plug for using your librarian. We haven't really talked about the plot a lot. And like every book conversation, I think we've spent a good amount of time talking about and so we can talk maybe about content. And if you're going to read this and you're wanting to miss spoilers, just I guess, but the book spends so much time talking about or like doing character development and placemaking. And something I thought was interesting was after as the kids grow up, one moves to Kawai moves to San Diego or Southern California. Dean moved to Spokane, Washington, which felt like a really random place. I know that's where he went to go to school for a little bit. And I'm curious, like, what those places might mean. Do they feel like to pick two seemingly very different parts of the mainland for children to end up? I don't know if anybody read into that more than just these are cities. Do they feel significant, considering how much emphasis is put on islands themselves as a character?
Well, right off the bat, Kawai finds a community there of other Hawaiian people who are transplanted there, going to school, doing whatever. So she finds a community, but Dean and Nainoa don't seem to have that same luck. And it seems like mostly everybody around them is white. And then Noah has his relationship with Khadijah and her child, and she's a Black woman. So it just kind of just shows like how even on the mainland, there's like a lot of geographical regions where it's less diverse, and kind of more cosmopolitan areas like where Kawai goes.
So I think if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think though Kawai saw the community of Hawaiian people, she opted not to join them because she didn't want to be overshadowed, because they'd know both of her brothers, who she was constantly being overshadowed by. And so ended up with reading about the quartet of Kawai and her three college buddies. Gosh, I could just picture that they emanated so much of your young college hubris, adventures, recklessness. Her story, I think, was the one that I was always glad when I turned the page and saw that we were getting something from her perspective. And maybe it's just because that was the closest I could relate to. But also I think I was most invested in hers. And so then became so heartbroken by how awful Fan was to her at the end, and then how awful. I think I did reread that part right before starting this, so I'm still feeling it viscerally. But I don't know, were there other parts, whether perspectives of a person or like the things you read that you feel deeply?
Well, one thing I thought about for the cities that the three ended up in, they're all in the mainland, but they were all just like up and down the coast. So it was close, and not that Hawaii's close, but it's close enough where you're away from home, you're on the mainland. It's totally, it seems very far away, but you're still like on the border, on that west coast. And what I did appreciate about hearing the stories of the kids who left and their sort of individual experiences, just growing and becoming a person individually instead of being compared to and contrasted to, or growing up in island life, which is it's just a different way of growing up than say in Portland or in San Diego. So I did appreciate hearing their perspectives of being away from home when in a new place. I think as a young adult or a person who is just, we're still developing as young adults, in our 20s or whatever, even in our 40s, but to watch them, you're still absorbing what's going on around you. And so they were still all, Lucy mentioned like the earth, they're still had that, or even when they would make their phone calls home to their parents, you could still just feel like Hawaii and the island and some of the things going on around them. And I think having the contrast of such a different city of like where they were in Hawaii versus like Portland, it's just a nice juxtaposition of position to see like where the character growth was, or are they really glad to be there, not at home, or do they miss home, or just the subtle comparisons, things that they discuss throughout the various chapters.
And I think home meant different things to each of them. I also think it's interesting to think about like why they went to the mainland. I think part of it is opportunity. Like there wasn't going to be a lot of, they're kind of living on this like edge of poverty, in Hawaii. And so it seems like they'd have to go away from that to have these opportunities. But at the same time, I think it's interesting. The book starts out with this whole talk of the collapse of the sugarcane industry and like how much of that is because of colonialization. You know, how much does like America or other places come in and change things and change the way of living for the people there, and then they end up coming to the place that changed, you know, the fiber of the land that they live on, and maybe don't have a great experience. I just thought it was an interesting little because I knew he started out, the book started off talking about the collapse of the sugarcane culture. So I'm like, this is, you know, it was just in my mind. But I just think it's interesting to think about that. Like, you know, how did America change Hawaii? And then what happens when those, you know, people from Hawaii have to move to America?
Thanks for bringing that up, because it is in the very beginning of the book. And it is the foundation for everything that happens later. It is not brought up again, really, until the end when Howie goes back into agriculture. And it's full circle, but otherwise, it reminds me of how little we pay attention collectively as people to the macroeconomic systems that impact migration, impact well-being, impact family dynamics. Unless you're like actively paying attention, it's very easy to disregard the actions of people with power as like really impacting your well-being. And I think we see that time and time again throughout the book with, and we can just talk about things plainly now, because I didn't listen to it, I'm probably mispronouncing, but now Naino, the middle child, or the youngest child, sorry, his falling off of a boat and being saved by a shark is the context for both the book title and how he's seen in his family and in his community. And he provides this glimmer of hope to his community after everything that they've been through. But because he's seen as being able to have healing powers, but those powers, it turns out, didn't really exist. And he also has to go back to feeling normal until he moves to Spokane, Washington, and works as an EMT. And he starts to get some of those powers, and has to provide some hope for people around him there. But it feels like it's just like little spikes of hope. It's little, but it's not sustained. And I'm thinking of where I'm going with this, but there's so much to unpack about what these characters represent. And like the muddling of the plot is kind of takes away from that, but what did people feel about how these characters were developed and what they represent for the story of Kawai?
I guess so. One of the things that I found most interesting with Nainoa's storyline was the call he had with Dean, where he was like, do you think that the thing, like the shark, the thing that is in me is in all of you and like our whole family? And I thought that was really interesting because I think part of what the book is getting at is this idea that like the connection with the land is what is most important and like is something that like is nourishing to everyone, like, you know, the connection to the land that you are from. And like, because that's like what kind of like starts restoring Nainoa before he accidentally dies, basically. And like that's what kind of restores Kaui too, when she after she's recovering from this kind of like horrible experience. And you wonder how much of like her actions on the mainland are a reflection of the like almost like if you think of her as like a plant, right? Like the transplant to the mainland and like that fit, like the nourishment being less because like that's not where she's from. Not that you can't move around or anything like that, but just like it seemed like she was kind of like missing this vital nourishment that she got in Hawaii. And like she was getting other things at college, but not these kind of like deeper things that I think the book was getting at when she started like farming and being involved in like having an extended relationship with the land. So I've gotten lost in what I was saying, but I think part of the book was like, I thought that was interesting, was this idea that like, well, if the thing that is special about Nainoa is like also in his whole family, it feels like something that is present and available to everyone if you like seek that sort of relationship with the land around you. And sorry if that didn't answer your question.
I think that makes sense because you think about the weight that he was carrying. And so much of that, I think, brought about his downfall is that he felt that he had taken on what he thought he could handle and it was too much and he had failed everyone. And so coming back to the land and having it not just be, I am the one magical person, but maybe it is within my family, within my home. And it did seem like he was kind of having that epiphany right at the end of things for him. But you also, maybe it was a little bit in the family. So I'm thinking about the scene where the parents find his graveyard and they see him with the owl and they both experience that same last flight of the owl that is what Noah is experiencing at that same time. And so maybe, this is going in this version of magic, but maybe he is the conduit for it, but that the people who are experiencing those same connections can experience some of it. Trying to think, did his EMT partner, did she have similar, she was recognizing what he was doing. Was she experiencing it too? No, but
No,
she
I
wasn't
think she
family.
saw what he was doing it. Yeah.
And she wasn't, then they were in Hawaii.
Mhm.
That makes me think of like them all having some connection to it. Like the scene or the chapter where Dean is looking for Nainoa. He kind of has a similar experience to Nainoa where the trail like opens up and shows him where this mudslide has taken place. And I feel like there are other places too where this happens with other characters like Kawai. Towards the end, she's tilling the land and then she has this like spiritual experience. And obviously it all started with the night marchers and then we come full circle and see them again. So I feel like it definitely is that, like Audrey said, like this overarching theme of connecting to the land. And another thing I thought of was, I think Dean says this a lot, like when he's in Portland and when he's in Spokane, is like, every day I'm here, my skin gets less brown because there's like no sun. And it's like that's something being taken from him all the time that he's there.
Yeah, I think it was in all of them. I mean, like when it starts, it's really it's Malia and Augie who see the night marchers. So obviously right at the beginning, they are making some sort of connection that is beyond like the earthly. And and like you were saying, Emily comes full circle in the end. It's Augie again who goes off with the night marchers. But there's this moment that I really found touching, like after Kawai has come and built this kind of amazing, new way of agriculture, and her mother is like, it was there all along. It was in her all along. I just wasn't looking, and so I think, like you were talking about, I don't really know where I'm going, but you're talking about Nainoa being like a conduit, and maybe it's just that it was there for everyone, but like something had to open their eyes, and that can happen in a lot of ways for people. Like maybe you gain new knowledge about something, or you read a book that makes you look at the world differently. So maybe it just took a longer realization for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, part of it is, and I do think that the family could see and feel these things. And I think part of it was their heritage and where they were and their tie to the land. But everybody's different, and everybody, even if everybody had something special within them, call it a power or whatever you want to call it, but everybody's different in the way they perceive the world, and their personalities are different, how you respond to what's going around you. And I think Noah was just the most susceptible, vulnerable, just like more emotional. He just had a different character than the other two who wanted to do different things. So he not that he embraced it more, but he just like let it embrace him more, if that makes any sense. And he was able to just feel it like this. It was just something that he swallowed that day. When the shark brought him on, he just swallowed it and it just sat in his stomach. Whereas the others were able to just like chew on it for a little bit and not really like absorb it as wholly or as fully as he did, because that was just the nature of his being and his character, was to just, also if you think about like the non-communication that happened within the family, I think that was a big factor too, because if they would have talked about things more, not that you need to, but if that would have happened, things may have come to different realizations. Because there were a few times where like Noah wanted to talk to the others and get information like, hey, do you have it too? Is it just me? But he also didn't want to talk about having it in him. So it's very interesting. And I did feel a lot about just the siblings and the differences among them, but yet they were all still like connected to their family and being there like when Noah died, and or not being there when Noah died, as in the sister, or yeah, it's just, there's just a lot of, I lost my train of thought there, but siblings. Oh, the connection to the land and going, I'm sorry, the connection to the land and going back home and just being drawn back to that. And even like when the sister, she leaves college to go back there, then she realizes everything that's going on with the father. And she's like, Mom, what is this? Is this how he is now? And the mom's like, yeah. And so she kind of gets trapped. She ends up having like a bit of hopefulness, as we've said, but she still ends up trapped there. But there's still like this familial cycle of like wanting to do something different, but also wanting to be there for the family, even though you're losing pieces of yourself. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I think there are hints early on too, like even in the kids' childhood, all of them, that they have special, like whether or not they're powers, but like the way they feel their special skills, like Kawai is like, she just feels hula, like she just does it, like it just comes to her basically. And that happens to her throughout her life, like she'll be dancing hula in her sleep. And then with Dean, his basketball skills, like he talks about it as like a flow that takes over, like he's not even thinking.
Well, and all three of the children at different points end up being a supporter and provider for the family. You know, Noah at first with the people coming and paying for his healing, and then Dean with sending the profits from his drug sales home. And then at the end, Kawai with both being there physically for her family and the farming to provide food. And goodness knows we see from the whole book, the parents doing everything they can. So even with all 5 members of their family contributing what they can, to see it still be a struggle, it's something.
But there's also love there. Like, I think, I mean, well, you were just talking about the connection, and there is support. I think, you know, it's this story of this family that like there really are living in poverty, but it's not, but they still like, especially the parents, you know, the way they talk to each other. And like the book starts off with the parents, you know, in like having a physical relation. And like, that's not, like, to write about that where it's the parents and it's not, it just was very real, and connecting them in a way that they seem to be connected throughout the book. And like, you know, she knows that Augie is coming back when he calls her babe, right? And so I don't really know what I'm trying to say with this, but I do feel like even though their situation was tough and their life was hard, and you know, poverty was really real, that there's still this love, you know, and experiencing of like joyful things like the hula and you know, the playing ukulele, and so
Interesting that we started this conversation with some not negative, but things we wish were different about the writing. All of us have been incapable of articulating the full thought of how deep the writing is simultaneously. I think that's a very powerful way of communicating bigger picture. Yes, like you're kind of slogging through, but dislog is the character development that isn't necessarily asked. And so yeah, there might have been like a slight miss or needed recalibration on expectations versus what we got. But I'm really thinking a lot about what people are saying about these characters and how different books show up again and again. And I am now reflecting on the parents' relationship and how throughout all of it, they still only had love for each other. And the stress of poverty, the stress of raising children, the stress of being your children in danger. None of it is like, yes, obviously it wears on any parent, but it really didn't seem to break the relationship. And that's an incredible demand of those two parents and their ability to what resilience can look like when it's not like big resiliency. It's how people can prioritize what's important to them.
I think that's why I think that's why they were like my favorite characters really in the end, because I loved their connection. And I really liked the parts of the book that they were featured in. And like the scene when, I mean, for me, I think like when he fell in the water and you're hearing that from his mother's point of view, and I just can't imagine, she's like waiting for this, blood to come up, and just to be that close and thinking like, I am here, I'm going to see my child get eaten by sharks, like to be brought to that, even if that's not how it turned out, like there's got to be a huge emotional weight to that she is carrying around. And yeah, I really liked her character and the father as well, as I've said a bunch of times, I think.
I liked her a lot. I got frustrated with her for like how focused she was on Ninoa, but like as we're talking about like that moment where she thought he was going to get eaten alive by sharks, I wonder how much of her like focus on him is like informed by that moment where she thought he was going to not just die but like get eaten alive in front of her eyes, like that's like particularly horrifying. So yeah, like I don't know, I just had that thought, but because I did get really frustrated with like especially that moment where she's at the end of the book where she's looking at Kawai and she's like, wow, this was here the whole time and I just didn't see it. And I was like, yep, you sure, like you just sure didn't, like, because you were very focused on your one kid to like the detriment of your other two. It's like very, to a certain extent, like it's obviously like it felt real because it was complicated, right? Like all families have complicated things like that where your relationships are just not equal or whatever. So it felt very real, but I think I like underestimated a little bit how like that moment with the shark probably informed like everything Nainoa did after that, even if he hadn't done the weird thing with the finger, because he probably would seem a little bit like a miracle child in that he came back alive at all that time.
I will say that after the New Year's thing, when the firework went off in the kid's hand, I was picturing like sort of what happens, but in a different terrible version where he becomes, like this religious savant where he's like, he is a healer, like that kind of thing. And so I was interested to see how the author was going to take that, and then did he have a gift, or was he given some sort of magical thing within him that would give him those powers? And I did like how we didn't really get an early glimpse into what he was doing. People were just coming into the home, and you find out like he wasn't even really doing anything. I don't know. He was still feeling some things were happening. He just wasn't like, poof, you're better, you're cured. It was sort of like he was moving things, and I like the descriptions of how it was like putting pieces together inside. Like first you put this together and that together, like a puzzle. And sometimes it just didn't work. Like the story, or when he was a paramedic, and the story of the pregnant woman. Oh, that was heartbreaking. And that was the last straw for him. Like he couldn't, that was just the tipping point into like, what happened to him
one of the things I thought was interesting about the whole like healing, him being like a healer phase, I guess, of his life was how much it seemed like, except for that one man with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, how much so many of the people just wanted to believe that like they like what the thing that they needed was like the belief that someone had like cured them or done something for them, because that's the only unsatisfied person that we have any evidence of. And it sounds like he healed quite a few, or healed, I guess, quite a few people. So I like that part was interesting to me, the like absence of a parade of people eventually coming back and being like, but you didn't, it was just that one guy. So
I kind of got the impression that he was somewhat healing others, because when it was the man with Parkinson's and when Dean was talking with him afterwards, he said it was Parkinson's, it was a neurological thing. So I kind of took it as, gee, the brain's a lot harder to fix. But that was just my reading of it.
I thought he said that he wasn't doing anything and that's why he stopped seeing them. Like he wasn't actually doing anything, but maybe I'm misremembering too.
I think he did say that. My way, again, the way I kind of got it was that he didn't, he was doing something, but it wasn't fixing.
Yeah.
He couldn't get it,
Yeah.
I couldn't get all of the pieces together, but maybe they were going harder way.
It does seem like it was practice for later. I do think that like for the like figuring out how to like bring the dog back to life and like all that stuff he did later where he was like actually healing people, like it did seem like this was like the early form of practice. So it probably did help some people, but I don't know. I do think the like belief, right? The offering of just like, I've healed you is something that some people need, like that's a thing some people just need, like regardless of whether you do or not.
Yeah, I don't think that's unique even to like his situation. I think you think about a lot of the things that people believe in and believe that make them better. And that just, it is believing in it. I thought a lot in this book about the burden that for like Nainoa to carry, just to, first of all, the pressure to be like, you're the moneymaker for our family. You have to heal these people. Like, that's just too much for a kid. But then later, I think he talks about like, every time he's doing that, he's putting those pieces together, like he's taking that in. And so, it's just like, you kind of picture the inside of him being broken, which is interesting if you think about it, because then like his father gets broken too. Like that's the way I look at Augie. It's just sort of breaking. He just breaks. But yeah, I just thought a lot about like this stings for this kid, so.
Because usually after he would have a moment of healing, whether it was when he was younger and in the house with people coming in or with the dog, like wasn't there after the dog he went to see Khadijah and she had some great metaphor about you look like blah 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 who died because he was so worn out, because you can imagine like he literally he put the pieces back together on the inside and he brought this dog back to life. So considering like the toll it took on him mentally and physically, like I was picturing his story. Like you read the book, and there were hints of like before such and such, or I wish I had said this before that happened, and something's going to happen. Like I figured that Noah was going to die. I didn't guess he would die the way he did. For some reason, I thought it would be more related to not an accident, more of like the toll all of this was on him. Sort of more like how Augie was going, where it was just kind of like breaking you, and then your mind was going, your body was going. Like you could see him going in that place. So for me, I pictured that's how Noah would end up too. But because it took such a toll mentally and physically on everything he was doing, and it impacted his life severely. I did really like the glimmer of hope and earlier in the book with him and Khadijah and the little girl, I forget her name. I like those pieces of normalcy. You can see that it's a bit of a struggle at times though, to be like normal and not talk about it with a partner. And they weren't together very long. That doesn't speak to the depth of what their relationship was. Who knows what that was, but he wasn't talking about what was going on, and again, to hide something from a partner, that's also another level of like, just again, bearing so much within him to keep inside that pit in his stomach.
I'm really, really loving the analysis of these characters and how people, different readers see themselves or don't see themselves in them. And that really speaks to the way the author three-dimensional and relationships between the characters as well. And we are at the top of the hour. I want to respect everyone's time, but I always appreciate these conversations. I know I was a pretty active listener this time, but I really, really enjoyed hearing everyone's take on all these different aspects of the book. We did read this for November because it is Indigenous Peoples Month and Hawaiian Indigenous People History. And I want to thank everyone for participating. Next month, we're reading Legends by Ted. It's a series of short stories in a sci-fi genre. So thank you everybody for participating, and I'll turn it over to you, Lucy, to close out.
Thank you. This was it was a really great discussion. So for thinking we weren't enthusiastic, there was a lot to say. So thank you.